Hi, I'm Melania. It's a beautiful name, isn't it? And my dad named me after a beautiful and very brave woman, Melanie Knudsen. She's a wild animal tamer from Denmark. My father dreamed that I would become a circus tamer too. Most of my life was spent backstage at the circus, where I closely watched my father perform. My mother died when I was born, so my father brought me up by himself. He always told me a lot about the wilderness, about Africa, about how one day, when he earned lots and lots of money, he and I would go on a trip around the world. Dad was always a big dreamer, and I dreamed along with him until one day there was an accident. I'll tell you what happened in a minute, but in the meantime, please subscribe to the channel and click on the bell. There's lots of fun stuff ahead. So we're renovating our tiny apartment. It had been in disrepair for a long time, and Dad had been saving up for a few years to update our place. We bought a couple rolls of new wallpaper, ceiling paint, rolled up our sleeves, and got to work. We borrowed a stepladder from a neighbor to paint the ceiling, but it turned out that the stepladder was damaged. Because of that, my dad, standing on the very top, fell down from it and hurt his back. The ambulance, hospital, and a disappointing diagnosis. Dad will have to spend a month in bed without getting up. And then there's the treatment, and we need money for it. Otherwise, he will be disabled. In a week, I was 15. That's why my dad was such in a hurry with the repairs. He knew how I dreamed of inviting my friends over and having fun on my birthday. And now, because of my silly desires, he is confined to his bed. Thinking and swallowing my tears, I reached the circus. They promised me some kind of compensation for my father.
On such a sunny day. Crying?
The tall blonde guy looked at me with a sneer. It was only now that I realized I was standing on the sidewalk crying. The guy's name was Kurt, and he was a few years older than me. We were walking around the city, eating ice cream, and I got my mind off my problems a little bit. And 2 hours later, Kurt looked at his phone and apologized, saying he had things to do. We exchanged phone numbers, and Kurt disappeared around the corner in a minute. The money I was given at the circus was barely enough to pay my hospital bill. The doctor said that without the money, he would have to discharge my dad next week, but he needs rehabilitation. The circus hinted to me that they wouldn't wait long. If Daddy doesn't get better in the next few weeks, they'll find another trainer. Suddenly, the phone vibrated. Kurt was asking how I was doing. The first time we met, I told him everything, and he was genuinely worried about me. He begged me to come to the same place where we'd met. He handed me an envelope with a lot of money in it. I can't take it, Kurt. You and I barely know each other, and I can't give it back. But Kurt shook his head in a negative way.
Your father needs help right now. It's a present, Melania. Take it.
In an outburst of gratitude, I hugged Kurt. There are still good people on this planet after all. And I ran as fast as I could to the hospital to pay for the treatment. The days flew by. I visited my father every day and secretly rejoiced to see that little by little he was recovering. After about 2 weeks, he started to get up. The doctor discharged him, and Dad promised to follow all the prescriptions at home. We started walking around the city with him little by little. He got tired quickly, so I was always there to help. Dad was very bored with his work and begged me to walk to the circus. After a couple of streetcars stops, we got off the same sidewalk where we had once met, Kurt, and slowly walked to the circus. We hadn't seen each other since all my time belonged to Dad. There was a commotion outside the circus. There were big trucks standing around, with empty cages next to them. Dad, seeing that, got nervous. I didn't understand what was going on here myself. I decided to go inside to find out what was going on. And in the doorway, I ran into Kurt.
What are you doing here?
I felt a little uncomfortable. While Kurt was looking for the right words, someone from inside called out, "Mr. Knudsen, everything is ready!" And Kurt jerked. It was like I was struck by lightning. Your last name is Knudsen? Are you related to Melanie Knudsen? Kurt got nervous.
It's complicated, Melania. I'm taking all the animals away. The circus can no longer support them.
You paid me off. You decided to stick me that lousy money so you wouldn't feel bad about it. Kurt pointed his eyes at my dad, who was sitting on a bench nearby.
At least your dad's walking. You saved him.
And now you're killing him. Without the circus and the animals, he can't live. And I naively believed you.
Kurt made a warning hand gesture. Melania, as soon as Daddy can perform, we'll be glad to have him in our circus. Hopefully, until then you'll stop being mad at me and understand why I did what I did.
A couple of minutes later, my dad and I were sitting on the bench watching the trucks pull away from the circus. They had a long journey to Denmark. A year had passed, and now my dad and I are on the train. He's made a full recovery. For the first couple of months, I was terribly angry with Kurt, but in my heart, I was grateful to him. He saved my father. And now we're going to Denmark. Kurt called 2 weeks ago and invited us. Daddy will have a job again. I will be able to resume school. I'll also get to meet his mother, my namesake Melanie Knudsen. She can't wait to see the same girl her son Kurt keeps telling her about. I'm afraid to sleep for the third day. I close my eyes, and immediately his image appears. And it's so scary. I don't know what to do. Now, I'll share this terrible story with you. Maybe you can give me some kind of advice. Luna, that's what my dad called me. He loved to observe the full moon through a telescope and always told me all kinds of stories associated with this natural phenomenon. My dad also loves hiking in the woods, and when I was 14, my parents and I took tents, sleeping bags, rubber boots with us, and headed for a hike in the mountains for a few days. We hiked all day. The nature was unbelievable. High mountains followed by dense forest, loud birds that accompanied us all the time, and aching legs that made my mother and me feel wobbly in the evening. We decided to take a break. It was getting dark. The moon rolled out into the sky. A full moon! I grinned as I saw a big bright plate in the sky. We threw off our heavy backpacks and collapsed on the ground. An owl greeted us somewhere in the distance. And Dad hummed strangely, twisting a map in his hands. As it turns out, he couldn't figure out where we were. According to his calculations, this big clearing couldn't be on our route, but Mom and I didn't care. We wanted to relax. After setting up the tent, we immediately crawled into sleeping bags, and soon my parents fell asleep peacefully. But I couldn't sleep. There were too many experiences for one day. I climbed out of the tent and decided to wander around with a flashlight. When I got a few yards away from the tent, I heard a strange sound, like a splash of water. But Dad didn't say anything about water. I pointed the flashlight into the distance, but the darkness was all around me. Suddenly, I heard like it was a fish plunging into the water. I stopped. Suddenly, I heard muttering, very quiet, and it was hard to make out what it sounded like, but I felt like the sound was enveloping me. I turned my head, and the sound haunted me. Panic won out, and I ran toward the tent. I crouched in the corner, dove into my sleeping bag, and closed my eyes. I began to hear stories about the various forest spirits that lived in the woods and lure people into their nets, about the terrible monsters that come down from the old trees at nightfall and begin to hunt people. Okay, stop. My imagination was doing scary things. I closed my eyes tightly, and before I continue, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. And make sure you have the bell clicked. Then you'll know when there's a new video coming out on the channel. So, I closed my eyes tightly and fell asleep. I was awakened by the bright sun shining through the tent. When I opened my eyes, I realized I was lying alone in the tent. Mom? Dad? I yelled, but all I got in response was the loud chirping of birds. I climbed out of the tent. No one. There were only tall trees around, surrounding the clearing on all sides. I wanted to cry. I began to shake with fear. I could not stop thinking about the terrible night, muttering. And suddenly, I felt a weight on my shoulder. Oh no!
Daughter, what are you doing?
Mom stood behind me and watched as I became hysterical. I'm sorry, Mom. I tried to calm down. I was just having a bad dream. Where's Dad?
He's picking mushrooms. He'll be right back.
Mom pointed her finger into the woods. I looked where Mom was pointing and suddenly I saw a big dark figure. It lasted just a few seconds, but I had time to make it out. A huge, tall figure with a big round head like a dome. Huge arms, almost to the ground. Green in color, and eyes. They were like glass. My mother noticed that I was staring intently somewhere.
Daughter, what's wrong with you?
I nodded my head in a negative way, trying to look deep into the forest. And then Dad came back, holding a large mushroom in his hands. And I began to listen to his story with interest, trying not to look into the woods. It turned out that he and Mom, while I was still asleep, had decided to survey the area. They walked around the clearing and found a lake nearby that wasn't on the map. I so wanted to tell them about my nighttime adventure and the gurgling, but I realized that I would be punished for leaving the tent by myself at night, so I kept quiet. The day was wonderful. We walked through the woods, gathered brushwood, made a fire, and roasted the sausages we had brought from home. Dad said we'd spend one more night here and then head back in the morning. As darkness fell, I felt uncomfortable. I decided this time to go to bed with my parents and not to wander anywhere else. When the round plate of moonlight flashed in the sky again, Dad yawned loudly and started to spread out the sleeping bags. After a few minutes, my parents were already sleeping, and I tossed from side to side. I couldn't get that strange figure figuring among the trees and the mumbling that had surrounded me the previous night out of my head. I have read many stories that when one comes into contact with wild nature, strange things happen. For example, the clean mountain air can cause hallucinations. Maybe the same thing happened to me. Suddenly a branch crunched, then another one, a little closer. I squeezed my eyes shut so tightly that they began to hurt. Don't get up, Luna. Close your eyes and ears. You're just making it up. But I could feel there's someone here. He's right here. And he knows I know he's here. And he's waiting. Suddenly the moon shone so brightly right on our tent that I saw a shadow, a huge one. It was standing right outside the tent, not moving. I looked at my peacefully sleeping parents and realized I had to protect them. On my knees, I crawled silently to the exit of the tent, and slowly, very slowly, I got out of it. I saw the stick near the entrance. My dad had brought it from the woods. I grabbed it tightly by the edge and crawled on. Suddenly, it was very dark. It was like the moon was mocking me. 1 minute it was so bright, and then suddenly it was hidden behind the clouds. But I felt that someone was there. And then I heard an owl scream. Oh, it was awful. The moon, there it was, rolled out again, and I saw a shadow. There was that huge figure near the tent again, with a head like a dome. I jumped up, gripping the stick tightly with both hands, and rushed screaming at the shadow. And with all my might, I hit the dome as high as I could. Take that, you forest monster! There you go! And more! Take that! Take that! The shadow tried to dodge the blows. My adrenaline was going through the roof, and my hand was buzzing and ringing at the same time. I heard a loud mooing. Luna! Is it me? Or does the monster know my name? I saw a flashlight near the tent, and I turned it on and pointed it at the monster. I was speechless. It was Matthew. He was sitting there in his scuba suit, trying to get the mask off his head. It was cracked. I'd hit it so hard with a stick. And Matthew's face was red and frightened. He was breathing heavily and looking at me with a mute question in his eyes. "What are you doing here?" I shouted. "And why are you wearing that suit?" "We had a drill here. I'm taking a scuba diving class, remember?" Matthew countered resentfully. "At night?" I didn't let up. "And at night too. Luna, divers are trained for all sorts of diving conditions." I was embarrassed. I thought Matthew, the same Matthew we'd been friends with since kindergarten, was a forest monster. I apologized. We built a fire. I made us some tea. Matthew told me he knew about our trip to the woods. Dad had told him, so he decided to track us down. But he couldn't get out before nightfall, and that was not the kind of greeting he expected. We talked for a long time, and couldn't stop talking. Matthew had blue circles under his eyes, probably from my hitting him with a stick. And then I fell asleep, woken by my parents at the smoldering fire. Matthew was gone. My parents were so angry that I'd left the tent at night that I decided to keep quiet about my meeting with Matthew for now. And as soon as we got out of the woods and the self-service came up, which was weird, Matthew's dad called. And he said there had been an accident that night. Matthew had drowned, drowning in the lake. Can you believe it? Of course, we were all in shock. It's been 3 days. And I feel awful. So his spirit came to me at night in the woods? How could I not have realized it? Maybe I was dreaming. Or maybe I have a gift. I can see dead people. And what was all that mumbling by the lake? I closed my eyes and saw Matthew. Can you tell me if you have experienced anything like this? Can you tell me what to do?